All right, we are back again. So, topic three was about the Articles of Confederation. For that, our main activity was actually a simulation where we went through some of the historical problems with the Articles of Confederation. So, you just need to know kind of the structure of government. So, I gave you a handout that explains how the government's set up, but we're talking a unicameral Congress. So, I'm just going to write some notes here. We had a unicameral where you had one house of Congress. You had equal representation of each state. You had no executive power whatsoever. They didn't have an executive branch, and you had a very weak um, confederation. So the states had most of the power themselves, and the national government had very little power. Could not tax, could not raise an army, yada yada yada. There's a variety of things that were occurring. Oh, very difficult to amend the Articles of Confederation. Every state had to approve the amendments. Most things that were very very important required a supermajority, 2/3 vote. Um, or sorry, a yeah, 9 of the 13 states, which is 2/3. Yeah, okay. Anywho, but yeah, so very very difficult to get things done. So we went through some historical examples of that. So as long as you know one what the structure was, some of the problems associated with it, especially if you can tie them back to historical events, and then how they were different once we got to the Constitution. So the first thing we did with the Constitution when we moved on to that was we looked at some of the arguments that led to compromises when setting up the Constitution. So, was there going to be a unicameral or a bicameral Congress, which basically means one house or two houses in the legislature? So there are a lot of arguments back and forth. The unicameral people basically they didn't really have a great argument for why it should be unicameral. It was mostly them arguing that bicameral wasn't necessary. The bicameral people were really worried about one house of Congress having too much power, and therefore nobody was really checking that legislative power directly between the different houses of Congress. So they want a bicameral Congress. So eventually, you ended up having one of those. We now currently have the House of Representatives and we have the Senate. Sorry, people are walking by the class. It's making me feel awkward. Yeah. So anyway, then election by the people versus election by the state legislatures. A lot of people that were founders thought that the people should not have direct control over every aspect of the legislature. They thought that the state legislatures should make more decisions about who was going to be in charge. They felt like the people in general would not make good decisions, that they weren't well enough informed, they weren't smart enough. There's a variety of different arguments for this. So, what they ended up doing kind of to compromise is you had the House of Representatives, HR, elected by people, and then originally you had the Senate elected by state legislatures. So that was the original thing that they did to kind of compromise on that problem. And then the last thing they did was they were wondering should we continue with what we have with the Articles of Confederation and have an equal representation in the legislature where all states are represented equally, or should we have a proportional representation where states that are more populated have more representatives or more representation? Which they a lot of the larger states thought would be more fair. So those relate back to these things called the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. New Jersey, small state, wants equal representation. Virginia, large state, wants proportional representation. And eventually that leads to the Great Compromise, as it's sometimes called, or the Connecticut Compromise, where you had again, bicameral legislature, House of Representatives is proportional, and Senate is equal. So two senators for every state, and then House of Representatives based on state size. Three branches of government define their functions. So I'm just going to write them in here. You've got legislative legislates. So they make laws. Executive executes or carries out laws. That's going to be the presidency. And then the judicial adjudicates or interprets the laws. They determine what's fair. Judicial has kind of part of judge, justice, judicial. So they interpret the laws. Six principles of the Constitution. This go back to that activity we did. I'm not gonna spend a ton of time going over all these. I think personally that we did a good job of knowing what those were in the Constitution. But again, they are actually, I'm going to go down to where they are. So you have popular sovereignty. So the authority rests with the people. Not a ton of really great examples in this. The House of Representatives is elected by everybody. The fact that the people can kind of change the Constitution is another example of popular sovereignty. The fact that the people are eventually given rights and a Bill of Rights is technically an example of popular sovereignty, even though it wasn't in the original Constitution. So authority rests with the people. Limit of government. Government power is not absolute. There's a few different examples of this in the Constitution. One is in Article 1, where Congress actually says what powers it does not have, which is pretty unique that a branch of government is actually describing the limits of its own power. Checks and balances is when one branch can limit the power of another branch, and that's going to be things like that's going to be uh, things like the House can impeach other members of the government. The president can veto bills passed by the House and the Senate. The Senate runs the impeachment trial. Um, the legislative branch has the power to spend money and raise taxes, but the president has the ability to carry out those laws. And for example, like run the military, even though Congress technically funds the military. The commander in chief is the president and the executive branch. Judicial branch gets to interpret what the laws mean. They get to preside over certain types of impeachment. Um, and then the one thing that wasn't originally given to them, but is a big example of checks and balances, is the power of judicial review. So the court can rule actions unconstitutional or laws unconstitutional. Not originally given to them, but interpreted in Marbury v. Madison that they have that power. So that's a huge power for the judicial branch. Federalism is power is separated between state and national governments. There's a variety of examples of that. And then finally, separation of powers, which means we're dividing powers among branches of government, or amongst, I think it's amongst branches of government. I always get that wrong. I made it this far in life though, so we can do it. Branches of government. So we have judicial power in a specific branch. We have one branch that can make laws, one branch that carries out laws, one branch that interprets laws. So Montesquieu, be very excited. Um, Next, I only got 2 minutes, so I might have to make a part three, friends. How exciting! So next, we've got the Federalists, Anti-Federalists, and the Bill of Rights. So you should know that Federalists really thought the Constitution was fine as is, no Bill of Rights needed, and the fact that they were called Federalists, they believe that the federal government should have more power, so the national government should be more powerful or powerful enough. Anti-Federalists, they really wanted a Bill of Rights. They thought the Constitution gave too much power to the national government. So they were against the Constitution. So in order to appease them and get the Constitution ratified, they passed the Bill of Rights, or at least the agreement that the Bill of Rights would happen, and they established your main freedoms. Now, what I'm going to say for the Bill of Rights in our last minute together here, my friends, is that you don't need to have every number memorized, okay? But you should know, like, the freedoms given to you in the First Amendment. You should know that there's an amendment or a freedom related to search and seizure. That there's a couple for due process if you're accused of a crime, like you have certain rights. 10th Amendment, that there are certain powers specifically for states and certain powers specifically for the national government. We talked about some of those when we talked about federalism in the Constitution. So just knowing a couple examples of that. Okay, to be honest, a lot of this is just, can you apply these concepts to different situations? That's what I'm really about, is like building your analytical skills and understanding how things apply to things, to other things. That was very vague. How concepts apply to situations. So as long as you have a basic understanding of the content and you've done the activities we've done in class, take a look back over them. If there's still something that you're not quite sure on, just let me know and I'm happy to help. But you're gonna be fine. All right. So don't fret too much, my friends. Peace out.